G'day, Pastor Blake here. Thanks so much for watching this message today. I pray that this sermon and resource would help grow you in your relationship with Jesus, also in conjunction with a local church. If you have any questions about our church, you can head to our website, devonportcoc.com.au. Again, thanks for watching this message today, and I do hope that it blesses you in your love and devotion towards Jesus Christ. Well, today, church, I'm wrapping up a short 3-week series called Confronting Conflict that we've been in. Did you notice it's not called, we didn't call it running away from conflict. We didn't call it ignoring conflict or sweeping conflict under the carpet, but confronting it. Week 1, we looked at confronting conflict in your home. How do you handle conflict in the house? It happens. It's part of life. And last Sunday, we unpacked confronting conflict in the workplace, and you can catch up on those messages if you missed any of them through our YouTube page or through our podcast, through our website as well. I remember in the first week I said that most of us, might not be everyone 100%, but I probably would guess that the majority of us were never taught how to handle conflict in our family of origin. Most of us, because most parents never taught it to their kids or modelled healthy conflict resolution skills. Maybe you did, and if you have, that has probably been a great blessing to your life. And so, for most of us, we're left to work it out ourselves, and for all of us here today, there's not a person in the room, we all experience conflict in our lives and conflict with other people. Conflict is an inevitable part of our lives. It really is. Conflict, though, for most of it can be a negative thing, but conflict always doesn't have to be a negative thing. However, often it does become that, and sometimes it has become toxic as well. I'll ask you a question. Have you ever experienced conflict in a church? Of course you have. Rhetorical question. How did it go? Was Christ glorified or was Christ diminished? What was the outcome of the conflict in the church? And it doesn't matter what church it is. This church has got a history, has had a history of conflict, and I don't think it's the only church. There's plenty of churches that have that. Because why? Because you're in the church, and so am I. Because people are in it. But I was actually reading an article recently about some of the things that churches have gotten into conflict about over the years. There's certainly some strange things from my perspective, maybe from you. Here's just a few. Argument over the appropriate length of the worship pastor's beard. They obviously didn't like millennials or that kind of thing. What about fight over whether or not to build a children's playground or to use the land for a cemetery? I mean, honestly, that's a no-brainer for me. Build the playground, right? A church argument and vote to decide if a clock in the worship centre should be removed. This is one of my favourites. A fight over which picture of Jesus to put in the foyer. I just want to know who took the picture. Right? A 45-minute heated argument over the type of filing cabinet to purchase, black or brown, 2, 3 or 4 drawers. Major conflict when the youth borrowed a crock pot that had not been used for years. How dare the youth minister do that, right? An argument over who has the authority to buy postage stamps for the church. A disagreement over the term potluck instead of pot blessing. Potluck lunch, obviously. Some church members left the church because one church member hid the vacuum cleaner from them. Now, let me tell you don't want to do that here with Catherine. She loves her wombat. That's what it's called, the wombat. You touch that, you're dead. So, but she's the cleaner, right? I read through those things, and on one hand, for me, I've got to tell you, church, they're hard for me to comprehend that, and yet, in the church that I first ministered in after I left my home church in New Zealand, I knew that I was no longer in Kansas when at the first governance meeting, there was an argument over buying 2 or 4 ply toilet paper or not for the church. It's truly sad, I think, to hear these stories. I never made them up. They're real stories, right? And I think it's a good thing. I just want to say this from the outset. It's a good thing that I'm teaching on conflict in the church when we have none in the church at the moment. You don't teach on conflict when you're in the middle of conflict. You teach on these things and teach it when we're not in it. Do you understand? So I just want to, let's be honest, and maybe you can relate to some of these, but in 25 years of pastoral ministry, I think, and now particularly on my role, I'm on the board of CCVT, Churches of Christ Victoria, Tasmania, and I'm about to go south to a church that I won't name, a Church of Christ. We've got to go in and help sort out some conflict in the church. So what would be some primary reasons that churches find themselves in conflict and experience conflict? Well, churches find themselves in conflict for primary reasons like this: resistance to change, worship styles. They've also been called the worship wars. Pride, selfishness, spiritual and emotional immaturity, personality differences, abuses of power, and that can be with leaders, it can be ministers, or it could be even just volunteer leaders, abuses of power, misunderstanding of church governance, unclear authority. Now, there's probably more, but they cover a lot of the conflicts that maybe you could think in your history of church. Are there any reasons there that come up for you? There might be some more. Sometimes there are individuals in churches who are just wolves in sheep's clothing, though, whose life's calling is to cause trouble in churches. Have you ever met people like that? But I just want to say this morning, but that's a whole other response and a whole other level. 1 Corinthians 12 to 21 says this: just as a body, though one has many parts, but all its many parts form one body, and so it is with Christ. For we were all baptized by one Spirit, so as to form one body, whether Jew or Gentile, slave or free, and we were all given the one Spirit to drink. Even so, the body is not made up of one part, but of many. So we're supposed to be one, but there's many of us. Now, if the foot should say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason stop being part of the body. And if the ear should say, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason stop being part of the body. And if the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? And if the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? But in fact, God has placed the parts in the body, every one of them, just as he wanted them to be. And if they were all one part, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, but one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, I don't need you, and the head cannot say to the feet, I don't need you. Obviously. I always think that when I kick my toe, I know my big toe is part of my body because it reminds me. Simply, I just want to say this morning as we start that you and I are different. Wow, who knew? Who knew, eh? That you and I are different. Take a look around here this morning. You and I, we're all different. We look different. We have different personalities. We have different family of origin. We have different upbringing, different family backgrounds. Some of us come from different in our church, some people come from different socio-economic backgrounds. We are all truly different, and our differences can be a source of division in a church, but I always think, by the grace of God, they can also be a source of great strength. I think they can be our greatest strength at times. The subject, so we're comfortable here this morning, that the subject of unity and disunity and division in the church is covered constantly in the New Testament. If we ever feel that, or maybe in the history of this church, if you've ever felt, man, we're in a unique time of conflict and division, all you have to do is read the epistles to remember that disagreements and difficulties and divisions have always been with us. That we are redeemed by Christ, and we see glimpses of the new creation that we are awaiting. We see glimpses of it, but as I mentioned in a message not too long ago, that we're in this in-between time. We're in this in-between times where sin still infects families, communities, and churches. And Paul uses the metaphor of the church as a body, and it's safe to say, though, that in the context that the church often, capital C, has always had an autoimmune deficiency. When someone has an autoimmune disease, their body's immune system attacks healthy cells instead of fulfilling its natural purpose of fighting off disease. I think churches at times are guilty of the same thing in the church, that we misidentify our real enemy, which is Satan, and attack one another and act like anyone who doesn't look like us, anyone who doesn't think like us, is like a foreign cell. Because much of the disagreement and conflict that people experience in churches lies in misunderstandings, conflict of interests, and just natural differences. Because we're all different. And so that's where a lot of stuff comes from. I mean, I said in the first week, where does most conflict come from? Well, it comes from within ourselves, James says. But a lot of conflicts that take place, it's because there's differences. And I always think that in a church, people get so passionate about things because it's faith, right? I think some people wouldn't speak to one another or treat other people in their workplace like sometimes can happen in the church. Why? Faith is a personal thing. You have your ideas about things. You have your ideas about the way churches should be led or things should be led, and we have differences of opinion, and we express it. And because we've got differences in a workplace, you're probably a little bit less likely to do that because you want to keep your job. You've got bills to pay. But we have differences. And look, I'm okay that we may have differing points of view on some theological matters. I'm okay about that, as long as they're like on things that aren't deal breakers. You may have a very different understanding of Revelation than I do, but so what? You might have a very different understanding about gifts and that than churches of Christ. Well, okay, that's fine. But we allow the main thing to be the main thing. You start talking that Jesus wasn't 100% God and 100% human, then we're going to have a conversation, right? That's called heresy. But I'm okay for you to have differences theologically on things that don't matter. They're not deal breakers. Does that make sense? I'm sure some of you have different ideas about Genesis and the creation story. Was it literal? Was it... Now, I have my viewpoint. I'm happy with the literal thing. But if you don't, I'm happy. I don't mind. You know what I'm trying to say here? We don't all have to be lemmings that think the same thing. We may have different points of view and express ourselves in ways that might surprise us, but I just think that's a normal part of what it means to be part of a diverse community. So you and I are different. Paul also points to the fact that we should elevate the seemingly lowly members and encourage unity and diversity in the church, validating the weaker members of the community, and that in God's kingdom that actually they occupy a greater space, a greater place of honour in the community. I think in navigating conflict in a church, we should remember that the earthly way of judging people is not God's way of judging people. And for me, it's no surprise that as after this chapter, Paul goes into 1 Corinthians chapter 13, which is the famous and great love chapter, isn't it? The famous love chapter, and Paul launches into this for a reason, to bring a theology of unity into, one of the reasons, a theology of unity into a practical area of our lives, and such as, example, conflict in a church. I mean, I've been in an AGM meeting when I thought, man, it's like an AGM meeting from hell. Like, are these people Christians, man? Surely they haven't been regenerated. Because the way that they were acting in that AGM is not Christ-like. And you are lost. I don't know, maybe if you've been in one of them, I don't know, maybe you haven't. But passages like this from Paul can feel hollow when we are experiencing conflict in a church. What does it mean for us that Christ's death and resurrection created this supernatural community bound together in unity when that's not what it actually looks like now? And yet the biblical witness of the early church, I think, should encourage us that Paul is describing this reality in order to exhort the church to live like it's actually true, even in the in-between. That we can cultivate that love towards one another in small ways over time, choosing to believe the best of one another. Can I just say the greatest gift that you can give to any church leader is give them the benefit of the doubt. See, I could preach on that for hours. The greatest gift that I can give to you is to give you the benefit of the doubt. If everyone gave each other the benefit of the doubt and expected the best of one another, believing the best of one another, giving people the benefit of the doubt, choosing to say kind words when we want to gossip or criticise. It's so easy to criticise. Choosing to serve the people that we struggle to love the most. Because our ultimate unity is guaranteed by Christ to come, but the extent to which you and I experience that in the in-between will require us to heed Paul's instructions. So you and I are different, and that's okay. Imagine if we're all the same. Imagine if we're all Blake Moores. Oh, that'd be hell. Imagine if we're all you. See, you need people like me and my personality, and I need people like you. Just before Jesus went to the cross, he prays this fascinating prayer. I find it fascinating. This is in the farewell discourses in John's Gospel. My prayer is not for them alone. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message, that all of them may be one. Father, just as you are in me and I am in you, may they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one, as we are one, I and them and you and me, so that we may be brought to complete unity. Then the world will know that you sent me and have loved them, even as you have loved me. I love that passage, because you know what it tells me? People get saved when churches are unified. People get saved when churches are unified. Jesus prayed that the unity of his followers would be equal to the oneness, of the Father and the Son united. And Jesus' prayer was not that we just get along so that we avoid church splits. His prayer was that we would become perfectly one. Jesus said that the purpose of our unity was what? So that the world will know that you sent me and loved them. Wow. Wow. Just stop and think about this today. How could our unity result in the world's belief? Church unity doesn't seem like it will result in people getting saved, but it did and does. I'll be honest with you. I can tell when a church is in conflict by walking into their worship gathering. Or I can tell that something's off. There's something not right in the place. Something's off. There's a spirit in the air. There's a spirit in the place. You can cut the air with a knife. You know that the number one reason why churches go into decline, there's many other reasons, but the number one reason why churches go into decline is because of conflict. If you want your church to decline, start a conflict. Why is a church who is experiencing conflict in decline? Oh, wow. You need a degree to work that one out, don't you? Because nobody wants to be there. New people can smell it a mile off. The place stinks. Is this relating to anybody today? I don't know. Maybe not. Show me a church in conflict and I'll show you a church where nobody is coming to Christ and nobody's getting baptized. But where there is unity, God confers a blessing. Oh, and by the way, that is applicable to unity in churches in a region, in a city. There's a reason why, the majority of churches in Devonport are in a healthy, good space in unity. Now, we have different flavours and colours and different ideas of doing things, but I can tell you, the relationships between the pastors in Devonport is I haven't seen it anywhere like it is. There's something unique there, and even yesterday was a testament to that, an example of that. Check this out from Acts chapter 4. All the believers were one in heart and mind, and no one claimed that any of their possessions was their own, but they shared everything they had. With great power, the apostles continued to testify to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and God's grace was so powerfully at work in them all that there were no needy persons among them. For from time to time, those who owned land or houses sold them and brought the money from the sales and put it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to anyone who had need. That's happened twice in our church in my time during Daring Faith. All the believers were one in heart and mind. No one claimed that any of their possessions was their own, but they shared everything they had. With great power, the apostles continued to testify to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus. And God's grace was so powerfully at work in them that there were no needy persons among them. From time to time, those who owned land or houses sold them and brought the money from the sales and put it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to anyone who had need. Who wants to be in that church? Yeah, who wants to be part of that community like that, right? Who does those things? I mean, who gives a proportion of their sale of their house to the church, man? I mean, I tell you, people who have been so overcome by the Spirit of God and that God owns everything, that's what they do. That's what they do. That's a miracle, you know. And I think it's no surprise that the Lord was adding to their number daily those who are getting saved. Of course. I think for many churches, and as I said, I'm starting to see a picture of some churches in our movement. And when are we going to take these promises seriously and spend our energy seeking unity? Not just the kind of unity where we avoid arguments with one another, but the kind where we truly live together as a family. I'm wondering when we're going to do that. And don't get me wrong, it's not easy. And forgiveness and grace constantly needs to be extended. My desires need to be laid down for the desires of others and vice versa. It's easy to talk up unity. It's easy to talk about it. But as we've seen in that passage of Scripture, it requires mutual sacrifice. It requires mutual sacrifice. Some of you need to start being sacrificial with your cash. It's going to have to be. It's part of what being a family is. Some of us have to be sacrificial with our time. Some of us need to actually be stretched and, it's going to put me out to help this person. I'm going to be put out. I'm going to be put out. Oh, okay. Jesus was put out. But it's mutual sacrifice and love is what the early church experienced that added to their number daily those who were being saved. I just want to end this point with this. I was thinking about this. I've never really thought about this before because it's so simple. But I think the most powerful things in Scripture are simple. I don't care about the white horse in Revelation. Tell me you love someone. Who would have thought, church, that one of the most powerful, people talk about evangelism. Who would have thought that the most powerful evangelism strategies for our church was to simply love one another and protect the unity of the church? That could be one of the most powerful evangelism strategies of the church. Hey, protect the unity of the church and love one another. I just want to wrap this series up today with some very practical ways to confront and resolve conflict in any area of your life. But before we do that, we need to familiarise ourselves with Matthew chapter 18. For example, if someone in the church has hurt you, offended you, maligned you, sinned against you, what should you do? Go straight to the pastor? Well, maybe not. Gossip? Tell your neighbour? Post a cryptic post on Facebook? No, here's what you do. Read Matthew chapter 18. And I just want to let you know that about 5 years ago, the CCL has very few operational governance policies because they don't deal in operations. But we do have 3 or 4 now operational governance policies, and one of them is a church discipline policy. And that came in about 5 years ago. The New Testament's quite clear that there are 3 clear reasons. I've never taught on this before, but I need to share it in this context. There are 3 clear reasons why a leadership of a church would take discipline on a church member. And I just mean anyone who attends the church when I say church member. Number 1, unrepentant sin. Number 2, deliberate disunity of the church. And number 3, teaching false doctrine and spreading that false doctrine amongst the community. They're the 3 major reasons that the New Testament teaches. Go and read it, it's there. 3 major reasons that a church would take discipline matters up against a church member. And by the way, that policy is available by request. But it's based on Matthew 18. Completely based on Matthew 18 with the spirit of restoration. If your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault, just between the 2 of you. If they listen to you, you have won them over. But if they will not listen, take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. And if they refuse to listen even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. So, the only way to resolve a conflict in any area of life, but even in the church, is to face it. So let's look at some ways to resolve a conflict, primarily in the church, but you can actually use this in your family, in the workplace, and in the church. The first thing is to go direct. Matthew 18 teaches this. Stop talking about someone and start talking to someone. This is the biggest thing that people in churches need to understand. And I'll give you permission. If you hear someone in our church talking about someone, tell them to go and talk to someone. Talk to the person. Stop talking about someone and start talking to someone. Go direct. In Matthew 18, Jesus is crystal clear on what to do, how to handle it. But very few Christians do it. Talk to the person you have a problem with directly. And I just add this point. If you haven't got the courage to do it directly, maybe the problem isn't big enough to worry about. Number 2, own your part of the conflict. Conflict is almost never 100% one person's fault. You know that? It's almost never. Well, think about your marriage. Like, it's not always, your wife is not 100% to blame, husband. Wife, your husband isn't 100% to blame. It takes 2 to, you know what, tango, to push dance. Own your part of the conflict. Thinking that you're not part of the problem is part of the problem. And one of the ways, someone told me this, one of the ways that you can figure out how you may be part of the problem is asking a compelling question. Would you like me to share that compelling question with you? Yeah, okay, here it goes. It's a dangerous question. What's it like to be on the other side of me? I realise that for some of you, to be on the other side of me has maybe been difficult. I am who I am. My leadership style is the way it is. It probably has been difficult to be on the side of me at times. Can I also say something? There have been times when it's been difficult to be on the side of some of you too. But that's the point, right? We're all in a work in progress. We all haven't arrived. Thank God I'm not where I used to be, but I'm certainly not where I need to be. I ask that question about myself, even to what's it like for my kids to be on the other side of me at times? Do you see how that question just, what's it like to be on the other side of me? And I think that in any conflict, you can apologise for something. I think you can. The other person is never 100% to blame. I think you can always find something to say, I'm sorry for this. I think you need to believe the best about others. I mentioned this before. It's easy to I find it really easy to assign bad motives to people. You can assign bad motives to people, but instead give them, as I said, the benefit of the doubt. Believing the best can help you address the issue directly without ruining the relationship. I think it can turn hurtful into helpful. Like, for an example, here's an example, like in the workplace. Hey, I know, Jimmy, you might not realise this, but sometimes your emails can come across as demanding and even demeaning. I'm not sure you're aware of that. But I just wanted to let you know how they leave me feeling. I know you probably don't mean to do that. And what does that do? That gives the person an out, and sometimes they might not realise that's what they do. Explain, don't blame. And I think this is where people can struggle the most. And I think this is the place where conversations can usually go sideways, because people begin to blame. I tell you what, I can blame. I mean, I got a degree in blaming. I can blame people. We can blame. Don't blame. Instead of saying, you always. Once my child says to me, I'm sure maybe it happened to you, but anyway, one of my kids says, you're the worst father in the world. I said, that's impossible. You haven't met every father in the world. You haven't met every father in the world. How can you say that? You don't generalize. You never. You always do this. You never do that. No, that's not really true. Share with them how you experience them. Ryan, on Tuesday when you told me what happened to Greg on the weekend, I felt like that was something Greg should have told me directly. Do you hear the difference between explaining and blaming? Be specific. You always do this, You just always seem so frustrated. You always do this. No, give one or two specific incidents is much better than making general accusations or commenting on personality traits of the person. Do you know, the other day in the meeting, you said this. Last week in your email, tell them that you want things to get better. What the person you're confronting needs hope. Let people know the gifts that they bring to the table, the good that they bring to the table, and tell them you're looking forward to the future and you want things to get better. You want things to work out. And then finally, pray for them. Because I think this is so important. Don't pray about them, pray for them. Don't pray about them, pray for them. I find it's almost impossible to stay angry at someone that I pray for. I don't think you can do that. If you do that, I think there's a gap between. That's a character issue. You can't stay angry at someone that you're praying for. Praying for that person gives you empathy towards them. That when you place both parties, yourself and the other person, at the foot of the cross, and you literally do that, and you place people at the foot of the cross as people who both need forgiveness, and powerful things can happen. Because at the foot of the cross, what should happen is that all superiority and pride should fall away. And I think that that goes a long way to solving the problem. So I just want to close this morning that let's remember that if you find yourself in conflict and with another person in the church, own it. If you're messed up, own it. Come before God in a holy way for forgiveness. Speak truth. If you've been hurt, tell them that. Talk to them, listen to them and pray for them. Give grace. Be quick to forgive. Forgiveness is not forgetting. But remember the grace upon grace that you yourself receive freely through Jesus Christ, and ask God to give you the grace to receive His grace and the grace to give it freely to others. Just quickly, I've got to finish up, but Matthew 5:23-24 says, "Therefore, if you're offering a gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift in front of the altar." I love that. I love Jesus. He says, if you're having conflict with someone, you can leave your offering. Thank you. Just note that. Please leave your offering still. Leave your offering still, and actually leave it there at the front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, and then come and offer your gift. If you have a problem with someone, Jesus is saying it's better that you work it out in the car park before you come into worship. Jesus said you can take that weekend off. Because if you're not right with others, if you're not right with God, so if you're not right with others, you can't be right with God. So if you're out of sync with a person in the church, how can you come and worship? Hallelujah, great is our God. It's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous, and you are kidding yourselves, and we are kidding ourselves. So before you come to the communion table today, I want to ask you, is there anyone you need to get right with in the church this morning? Before we come to the communion table.